Hi all, thank you for being here today. My name is Carolyn Ash. I am the Development and Operations Associate with the PeaceWorks Foundation. I've been with PeaceWorks since April. We're really excited to continue this conversation with you. A little bit of a background about our program. Throughout the month of November, we've visited nearly 20 universities between the Midwest and Northeast, and now Stanford. So we will have reached that goal by the end of this week. However, we don't want this program to just be a speaker series where you listen to us and then leave. We want to continue that conversation with you after today's event, which is why you all were given a card with a QR code. If you have not received one, please let me know and come see me after the series. On there are different ways that you can continue to engage with us after this discussion. And it is a ranking system. It's really easy to fill out. It takes maybe 2 to 3 minutes at most. And from there, we would love to continue to take this conversation offline and would love for you to join us at 4 p.m. today at the Rubin Hills Conference Room. So with that said, and without further ado, I would love to introduce you to our next speakers.
Hot mic.
Hi. Thank you all for showing up. It's a pleasure to see all of you taking interest in Israel-Palestine peace building. My name is Ezzeldeen Masri. I am Palestinian American, originally from the Gaza Strip, from a small village called Beit Lahia in the northwest of Gaza, overseeing the Mediterranean Sea, and to the north of us is Israel. My involvement with Israel-Palestine conflict came from an early age, being born in Gaza in the early 1970s. By the time I was like 6 or 7, I started to know the environment around me, and things were peaceful in the beginning of the 70s in the Gaza Strip, and we didn't have borders between us and Israel, and most of people made their living working inside Israel. So growing up as a little kid, we had 3 channels on TV, Israel, Jordan, and Egypt, and watching the Israeli TV, going to school where they taught government school in Gaza, where they taught us Hebrew along with the Arabic. You go to the hospital, half the sign in Arabic, half in Hebrew. You go to the school, half the sign in Arabic, half in Hebrew. So my first impression as a little kid, 7, 8 years, was that I'm Israeli. I didn't know nothing about Palestine. People around me did not talk much about Palestine. And I'm saying when I was maybe first grade or second grade. This changed like maybe when I was in 3rd or 4th grade. Following me with my father watching the news from the Israeli TV in Arabic. And they were talking about Palestinians who sabotaged the Israelis and killed some soldiers, and I was kind of disturbed. Why they do this, against the army, against the Israelis? And my father said, well, we are not Israelis, we are Arab Palestinians, we are under Israeli military occupation, and those sabotagers are freedom fighters. They are PLO freedom fighters. We are under military occupation. I didn't know what he was talking about. I was too young to realize what he's speaking about. But in particular, in 1979, with the signing of the Camp David agreement between Egypt and Israel, Moshe, back then Menachem Begin and Mohammed Anwar Sadat, the president of Egypt. I lived in Gaza City in the Rimal district. They say it's the most prestigious neighborhood in Gaza. We were renting there. And the street, behind our house housed the General High School for Palestinians, boys. Next to it, a high school for Palestinian girls. Next to it, junior high for girls, junior high for boys, elementary for boys, elementary for girls. So Palestine Street behind us had approximately around 2,000, 3,000 students. So on the signing of the Camp David between Israel and Egypt, those students went on strike and went out chanting against Mohammed Anwar Sadat and Menachem Begin and the Camp David Agreement. And they were very loud, the chanting for the PLO. And I was, as I told you, maybe 10 years old, maybe 9. But soon after, the Israeli army arrived, started shooting, and a whole chaos, you know, and students running, and some of them running in my backyard. And this was my first encounter with the conflict, Israel-Palestine. And now, when my father came, my mother told him what happened. My father talked to me about it, and now I know that we are Arabs, Muslims, Christians, Palestinians. We are under the Israeli military occupation. I understood this fact. And soon enough, we will leave our rented house in Gaza City, and my father will build his own house in Beit Lahia, the village we are from. And my father was a teacher, Arabic teacher with UNRWA, the United Nations Agency for Palestinians to help them. He was a teacher, Arabic teacher in Jabalia refugee camp in northern Gaza. So he brought me with him. So 5th grade, he took me to study in Jabalia refugee camp where he taught in El Fakhura elementary school, which later would become famous because the Israeli army had targeted and killed many people during the war of 2008, 2009. Being a Palestinian kid who was born in Gaza City and went to school, to private schools in Gaza City with the sons of the merchants and the rich ones, now I am studying with Palestinian refugees in Jabalia refugee camp. And their agenda, their calendar was totally different than the kids in the private school in Gaza. Those are kids who are the sons of the refugees of the war of 1948. And they live in a refugee camp. And they have a national calendar. And this day, for example, the Israeli committed the Deir Yassin massacre. We have to go outside and protest. On this day, Israel occupied Gaza. We have to go out and protest. So little by little, I'm taking part in these protests as early as 6th grade. And then when I moved on to junior high, I started participating with the kids, the refugee kids, commemorating all these national calendar. And then by the time I was in high school, I started leading the protest with other kids. And by the time I was 17, I joined the Palestinian Communist Party. Why the Communist Party? Because the Communist Party did not have an armed wing. The other Palestinian organizations have armed wings. So I didn't want to be involved in violence or guns. I joined the Palestinian Communist Party, which back then in 1986 called for a two-state solution. Soon enough, the first uprising erupted in 1987, December, following a car crash with Israeli truck driver and Palestinian workers inside Israel. It was an accident. And the Israeli guy broke down. He went and surrendered to the police. But again, they brought the bodies of those workers into Jabalia village next to Jabalia refugee camp, and hell broke out. I remember it very vividly at night, screaming and chanting against Israel. It was like 3 kilometers away from my village, but I could hear it when they were burying the dead. And then the next day, I went to high school in Beit Hanun City, next to Mines. I led the protest with others, and we wanted to march against the Israeli checkpoint areas. we dispersed, and I went home to know that the Israelis have killed a boy, his name Hatim al-Sisi, in Jabali refugee camp, and the uprising started against Israel. In 1990, I came to America, to Chicago, as F1 visa student. The night before, I was spray painting on the walls and hanging Palestinian flags and with the kufiya covered and everything. And around 11 at night, my father dropped me off at Ben Gurion Airport, and I came to Chicago to study political science and criminal justice. In 2003, I finished my master's degree, and I went back to Palestine because I wanted to be part of the state building. I wanted to work for the Palestinian government. And sure enough, I was recruited by the Palestinian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the peace sector, and overseeing all the organizations working on Israel-Palestine peace process. And I met OneVoice Movement, the PeaceWorks Foundation, in 2006 in Gaza. And in November 2006, I opened the office for the PeaceWorks Foundation in Gaza, promoting peace, coexistence, and negotiated two-state solution and coexistence between the Israelis and the Palestinians. It was a very challenging task for you, a Palestinian son of a refugee, to go talk in Arabic in refugee camps and villages and cities about coexistence while the military occupation still exists and the struggle against ending the military occupation still exists. So imagine, okay, a Palestinian talking in Arabic to other Palestinians, promoting negotiation and coexistence with Israel, and following Hamas coup against the Palestinian Authority in 2007, Hamas gunmen attacked my office and confiscated all my papers and my laptop, and they told me you cannot work in Gaza calling for coexistence with Israel. I continued working, but not without an office, promoting for peace between Israelis and Palestinians, and also ran a leadership development program to that effect with university students. And 2008 war I witnessed was very hard for me and my family being American. So American embassy evacuated us under fire from Gaza to Jordan, and then I made my way to Ramallah. Stayed in Ramallah for 2-3 years, also working on joint programs between Israelis and Palestinians. And then in 2012, I went back to Gaza to witness the war of 2014. It was very destructive, very scary. For somebody who's not a soldier, being in the war and listening to the F-16s bombing and the tanks moving and etc., it's really scary. So 2014, again, I was evacuated, and I never went back to Gaza since. So it's been 10 years since I left my house in Gaza. In 2015 in Chicago, I started the One Voice on Campus program in order to educate American students about the urgent need to end Israel-Palestine conflict. Now we run the PeaceWorks on Campus program, and the hope is to meet students who are on their way to become America's future diplomats. Why? Because we believe that without the American administration involvement in Israel-Palestine peace process, there will be no peace process. So we hope to meet those students, the diplomats of tomorrow, and to leave with them an impression that peace is possible between Israelis and Palestinians. I'm talking to you today. I told you I'm from Beit Lahia. I'm from the Masri family in northern Gaza. My family is around 2,000 people. We are in Beit Lahia village. I lost approximately around 80 of my family members. Those are civilians, not gunmen. I also lost gunmen, but I'm talking about the civilians, 80, and maybe more today. And those are babies, mothers, grandfathers, grandmothers. But that doesn't shake my strong commitment for peace and coexistence with Israel, because the alternative is continued war. The Jews and the Arabs love that land between the River Jordan and the Mediterranean, and they are willing to sacrifice their best, their kids, in order to assert their sovereignty in that land. The only way to continue living in that area for Jews and Arabs is to negotiate a two-state solution in which the Jews will have their country and the Arab, Palestinian, Muslim, and Christians will have theirs. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. So what I want to do now is talk about four things. The first is where I come from, and maybe say a few words about the past year. The second is lay out the three options that are offered to us today in the context of the conflict. The third is to try to give the parameters to a solution as I see it. And the fourth is what we, each and every one of us in this room, can do moving forward. So I'm an Israeli, I'm a Jew, I'm a Zionist. On October 7th, I have lost friends. I have friends who are survivors of October 7th. I have currently close friends and family that are serving in the IDF. I served in the IDF. My husband served in the IDF. In a few years from now, my children will serve in the IDF. Up until October 7th, this is my fourth and last year in the Bay Area before I go back to Israel. Up until October 7th, the way for me to love Israel, to be a lover of Israel, was calling Israel out on everything that Israel should be and is not doing. That means what I call the struggle over Israel's soul, its moral aspirations. Ever since October 7th, what happened is, and the struggle for Israel's soul is definitely relevant today too, even more so. If you look at the apathy that Israelis are treating the mass destruction and the civilian deaths in Gaza, if you look at the treatment to Palestinians in the West Bank, the struggle, if you look at the challenges for Israeli democracy, the fight, the struggle for Israel's soul is very relevant today. But at the same time, ever since October 7th, I found myself hearing criticism, which I call bad faith criticism on Israel. And I found myself rejecting it, even if some of the times I actually agree with the substance of what is said, if it's talking about the West Bank or if it's talking about Gaza, because ever since October 7th, Israel is not only fighting for its soul, but in the eyes of Israelis, it is also fighting for its body, meaning that what we've seen on October 7th is two kinds of attacks for Israelis. I'm saying here the perspective of Israelis. The first is the attack on October 7th, which is the physical attack, right? It was the intent that didn't go through all the way because it was stopped by Israelis. But the intent was to kill as many Jews as possible, basically, or as many Israelis as possible, because, as you know, a lot of non-Jews were also massacred on October 7th by Hamas. But there's also an ideological attack on Israel ever since October 7th. And it's an attack that says, you know what, which is what I call the bad faith criticism, because if until October 7th, in the majority of places, Israel, it was obvious that Israel is a nation among nations, it's not that obvious anymore. Israel and Zionism is perceived as irredeemable, as something that is inherently heinous. And if that's the case, I ask myself, when I sit, and hear criticism, I find myself saying, wait, if I support this, does this mean that I'm giving ammunition to those who want to delegitimize Israel? And basically, the final project is basically destroying or canceling or eliminating the place which I call home. So that's the first. That's the bad faith criticism. But I think that what Israel actually needs right now, because as I said, the moral problems did not go away. They are very grim right now. When I look at my home, when I look at the Israeli people, I am very concerned. I'm very concerned with the apathy. I'm very concerned with the lack of thinking about the future, and I'll speak about that in a sec. So what I think is needed right now is what I call good faith criticism. Good faith criticism is a constructive criticism. It's not one-sided. It actually cares about the people it criticizes and their future and what they will end up having. That is what Israel needs, because, and it's also easier, by the way, for Israelis to actually hear, because good faith criticism, as opposed to bad faith criticism, tries to influence. if we want to move something in the region, we have to have Israelis with us. We have to strengthen agents of change among Israelis. So it's very, very important that such criticism will be constructive. There are three options, and that's the second point that I want to say. There are three options on the table right now. What will be the future for Israel-Palestine? The first option is what Hamas tried to do on October 7th, and that's eliminate Israel, destroy Israel. And that's what we hear with the ideological attack on Israel. That's number one. That's not going to happen because Israel is strong and Israel still has friends. It's not yet a pariah state. So it's not going to happen. This is not going to work. Option number two is the opposite, is the mirror image, is what Israelis call total victory, or what I've heard President-elect Trump says, it's a peace out of power, or peace that is based on power. And there's something compelling about this option that says, you know what, if someone attacked me and I'm stronger, then they should just give up. They should just lose. If you started a war and you can't win it, you should lose it. But I have news for you. That's not going to happen too. Because the incentive to say as a people, and when I'm talking about my enemy is Hamas, my enemy is Hezbollah, my enemy is the Islamist Republic of Iran, my enemy is definitely not the Palestinians. If I want someone to say, okay, we give up, they would give up because they care about their citizens. Hamas doesn't care about their citizens. Therefore, they have no incentive to give up. That means that this number two, and it doesn't matter how much, in Israel, they're printing hats with total victory. They can print all the hats that they want. That's not going to happen because Hamas doesn't care. And right now, Hamas controls Gaza Strip. So that's option number two. Option number three is negotiation, is to reach an agreement because, again, guess what? As said, no one is going anywhere. I'm hearing people talking about this, an agreement in the language of divorce. Think about a divorce, but when both spouses are staying in the same house. They have to still share the same house and they're divorced. We have to understand that, which brings me to my third point. How is this solution look like? How will it look like? I'm having a very difficult time calling the protests on U.S. campuses, for me, are not pro-Palestinians. They are anti-Israel. I consider myself pro-Palestinian. I think that the Palestinians have a right for self-determination, and we should all support Palestinians' right to self-determination. The way to coexist in the land of Israel, in the land of Israel-Palestine, moves through an agreement right now, but this agreement has to take into consideration the security, the legitimate security interests of Israel. That means a demilitarized state, at least at the first stages. And I have to say something more. A lot of people say to Israel, military force alone or military force will never win you this war because you cannot beat an idea. And if you use military force, if you only use, and Israel has an overwhelming military force, and which it has used against its enemies ever since October 8th. But if you use your force, you will not kill the idea. You will only perpetuate more conflict and more war and more humiliation. And I agree with that. That's true. But at the same time, I think we also need to understand that probably, at least at this point, military force will be a part of the solution because the enemies of Israel, again, Hamas, Hezbollah, the Islamist regime in Iran needs to understand that option one from before, eliminating Israel, is not going to happen in order for the more moderate people to be able to have agency and to ask for change. And Israel on its own, from Israel's side, Israel must must offer a solution that is not only based on military force, because you cannot win a war only on destroying. You have to offer building and a positive vision for the future, which leads me to my fourth point. We're not sitting with our leaderships right now. Both Israeli leadership and Palestinian leadership right now are incapable and unwilling to reach a solution. You know, for me, every 4 years-ish, I get to elect my leadership. I have, I think, a duty, an obligation to protest my leadership, which is, I don't know, I haven't mentioned it, I think, one of the worst government that Israel has ever had. With the Palestinians, it's more complicated because there are no free election. But that doesn't mean that we are helpless in doing, in promoting a better future. Because what we need, we are incentivized by the actors on the ground, by social media, by everything around us to see this as a zero-sum game, where it is either the Palestinians or Israelis. And it only matters, the only difference is who of them you want to win. And those who say, no, it's actually not a zero-sum game, are usually quiet, are usually being silenced. So what each and every one of us can do is not only reject the model that says it's zero-sum, but actually be loud and model for those on the ground in Israel and Palestine how this conversation should look like. Because you know what? People who are right now fighting, it's hard for them. People on the ground that have skin in the game, it's hard to have this discourse because of distrust, because of hatred, because of pain, deep pain in both of these societies right now. And deep destruction in both of these societies right now. But we are not there. We are far away right now, and we can model how this should look like, how this is not a zero-sum game, how we can change the discourse in our society, which will hopefully also trickle in to both societies in the Middle East.
Remarks. Let me just exploit the moderator's privilege and ask maybe one or two questions to kick things off, and then we'll open it up to you. You know, Masua, I was thinking about the last remarks you made about what people are saying on the ground. I've been kind of working on the Israeli-Palestinian, the co-sponsor of this event is the Stanford Center on International Conflict and Negotiation, which I direct, and have been worked on Israel-Palestine issues for many years. And I feel that among the Israeli polity, the level of support for the notion of a two-state solution is really as low as I have seen since the Second Intifada. Even to the extent that there are left, well, we don't really have very many left parties anymore, right? And the centrist parties, Lapid, et cetera, support the idea of either being silent on the question of a two-state solution or supporting the government's rejection, explicit rejection. As I see the same thing, you know, I've been tracking, you know, Hillel Shikaki's polling data, you know, for 20 years, right, on attitudes among Palestinians, and I see a steady decline among Palestinians in support for the notion of a two-state solution. So am I right that the support among the publics in these two communities is lower than ever? And if so, why and what can be done?
Well, the two-state solution, I am an advocate of the two-state solution because the two-state solution is the most doable solution to Israel-Palestine conflict. In comparison, for example, to the binational, one democratic binational state. The two-state solution enjoys the support of the PLO, the legitimate representative of the Palestinian people. That's the platform of the PLO. A Palestinian state under 1967 borders in Gaza, the West Bank, with East Jerusalem as its capital. That said, I agree with you that there are a skepticism among Palestinians about the implementation of the two-state solution, and that's what makes the polls show decline in support of the two-state solution, because Palestinians for the past, since 1993, have been promised a Palestinian state, and been almost 30 years, and we still live under Israeli military occupation. So there is big skepticism when it comes to the implementation of the two-state solution. But with any light at the end of the tunnel, meaning if for a political process and negotiation to start again, and there are signs for ending the occupation and the implementation of a two-state solution, you'll have a majority of Palestinian people come out in support of a two-state solution, because a two-state solution meaning the establishment of the Palestinian state next to Israel. That's our salvation for us in the occupied territories and Palestinian in the diaspora. Thank you.
So I think you're right. First of all, I think we don't need to be surprised that during war, the people become more more extreme in their views, and I think we'll see something different after the war. You're absolutely right in that what's interesting is not among Israeli conservatives, but among Israeli liberals, the concept of a Palestinian state is really on a decrease. I have heard, I think a couple of years ago, you had here a visiting professor from Israel, Professor Eran Halperin, who's a behavioral psychologist, and he's doing a lot of surveys on the Israeli public. And he uses an interesting term. Yes, he's wonderful. And he says something interesting. On the individual level, Israel is moving right. On the national level, it is moving left. And how can that be? We see that there is a very high support for ceasefire agreement. In fact, most of the people in Israel want ceasefire. It is true that the majority of them want it because they want the hostages back, but they don't like this war, even though the vast majority of Israelis consider this war as an existential war. There's also deep mistrust in Netanyahu. But yes, there is a decrease in the idea of a Palestinian state, because people in Israel say, we've seen on October 7th what happened when we had a Palestinian entity that we had no, because on 2005 Israeli forces left the Gaza Strip, as opposed to what happens on the West Bank. On the West Bank, Israeli IDF can go in and out as they wish. On Gaza, that's not the case. So Israelis are saying, we've seen on October 7th what happens when we're not there, and that was only a small part of Israel. So what we'll have is throughout the border of Israel, at the outskirts of Tel Aviv, at the outskirts of Jerusalem, we're scared. It's based on fear, and that's, I'll just say, the best possible solution, the best possible alternative for this government, because it thrives on using fear as a method of deepening its control with the people.
Is there another side to the impact of the war? I mean, obviously the war has caused, as we noted at the outset, tremendous suffering, tremendous loss, and it accelerates demonization of the other side. It contributes to deepening hostility. But is there also a way in which the Gaza war could be constructive for those who are in favor of a negotiated solution, in the sense that it demonstrates that the status quo is intolerable, that Israel's effort to kind of control Palestinian populations in Gaza through sealing them off in a territory that's excluded from access to the outside world, through control in the West Bank, with security forces, control of roads, movement, goods, etc., that cannot be the basis for a long-term solution, that a political solution rather than a security solution ultimately is required. Is that part of the discourse, at least particularly among the Israelis and perhaps also among the Palestinians who thought, well, we thought we would pursue resistance and look at the terrible suffering that has befallen our people as a result?
I think it's definitely, there is an alternative. And the alternative is, yes, the status quo didn't work, but you know why? Not the status quo didn't work according to this alternative because we didn't hold the West Bank, that we didn't hold Gaza as we hold the West Bank. And if we hold Gaza the same way, then it'll never happen again. So there is an alternative, and this alternative is very dangerous, and it is definitely represented in the Israeli government. And I tell you this as an Israeli that objects this, it is also compelling. And the reason that it is compelling is because people in Israel are deeply traumatized. I'm sure Palestinians are too, obviously. But people in Israel, when they hear the stories of just plain evil from October 7th, people in Israel are scared. So there is an alternative. It is very loudly represented right now in within the government, but there's definitely also the side that says we cannot go on like this forever. This is not, we have to reach an agreement. And then the question is how you call this agreement. Now, by the way, when you spoke about a Palestinian state, we can, a lot of what matters is how we frame this. If we frame it as negotiations for an agreement or negotiations for a Palestinian state. If we talk about the first, there's a vast majority in Israel that is for it. If we talk about the second, there's a vast majority in Israel against it. They can be exactly the same in their content. But framing is important. Framing is obviously also important for Palestinians for their own, against humiliation. So that's why it's kind of a deadlock.
So the Palestinian political landscape is divided between the PLO, which is a coalition of 13 Palestinian factions, including Fatah, the biggest Palestinian faction. And the PLO position since 1993 and even 1988 that we want to finish this conflict with Israel through negotiations leading to a Palestinian state on the 1967 borders. On the other hand, we have Hamas, the Islamic resistance movement, born in 1987. And we have Jihad al-Islami movement. And those two organizations are supported by the Islamic Republic of Iran. And both Hamas and Jihad al-Islami not included in the political process. They don't recognize Israel. And they want a Palestinian Muslim state from the river to the sea. So the Palestinian people are divided when it comes to the PLO position and when it comes to Hamas and the Islamists. Also, the Palestinians are divided because our people are, some of them are in the occupied territories in Gaza and the West Bank, and we are around, in Gaza and the West Bank, we are around approximately 6 million, more or less. But we have the vast majority of the Palestinian people are in the diaspora, refugees in Lebanon and Syria and in Jordan in particular, and Europe and America. Now, the division is us in the occupied territories in Gaza and the West Bank. We want immediate removal of the Israeli checkpoints. We want end the occupation. We want a Palestinian state in Gaza and the West Bank with Jerusalem as its capital. This is us in the occupied territories because we experienced the occupation firsthand. But the Palestinians who are in the diaspora, their priority is different. Their priority and their objective is the right of return. They don't care to a Palestinian state, to Israel, to a binational state. They want to go back. So you see, now with the war in Gaza, Professor Allen, with the war in Gaza, the humanitarian conditions are very bad to the extent that in northern Gaza, where I'm from, now there's starvation there. There's no food, no water, and Israel actually implementing a plan to crack on the militants. So they are ordering the people to evacuate and head south. And that also complicates things. And people are desperate because also Israel now is talking about implementing military rule over Gaza with the resurrection of the civil administration that works with the Israeli army to control the people of Gaza. So people in Gaza, they see the two-state solution as their salvation, but for them it's very far now. They blame Hamas largely for invoking the Israeli response against us. We lost 44,000 people. 44,000 people. Most of our people are displaced. My house was bombed and destroyed. My neighborhood was bombed and destroyed. So the two-state solution and a Palestinian state and the 1967 border is our salvation as Palestinian people. It will end the state of war with Israel. It will allow for us Palestinians to live in a Palestinian state, and also will offer opportunity for Palestinians in the diaspora to come back into the newly established Palestinian state.
Thank you. I'll ask one last question, and then if you have questions, get ready, because we'll hand it over to you next. The conversation that we're having here between an Israeli and a Palestinian is not a conversation that might be easy to have in the region. Among the Palestinian community, people who are reaching out to engage with the Israelis are referred to as normalizers. There's a huge social cost associated with people who are prepared to engage with Israelis, other than those who are already in agreement with the Palestinian perspective, which I think at this point is limited to pretty much the anarchists, right? Among Israelis, too, I mean, now people who are expressing sympathy for Palestinians are removed from their role in parliament if they are Israeli Arabs, can be arrested for sympathy for terrorism. So this kind of conversation is very difficult. What do you think people can do? What practical steps can people take inside Palestine and Israel and outside Palestine and Israel to try to further the mission that you're championing?
So with parts of my family right now, this is an act of treason, what I'm doing. And a lot of what I've been doing. I'm not talking about random Israelis, but my own family. I think we need to do this differently inside Israel and outside of Israel. Outside of Israel, we need to have this as much as possible. Inside Israel, it's more complicated. Inside Israel, what I would do, and I think it's part of what we're doing as part of my work at the Hartman Institute, is what we're doing is we're using Judaism, actually, as a key to asking moral questions about how do we come to terms with the fact that there are so many civilian casualties in Gaza. How do we come to terms with the destruction that Gaza is going through, and what are some of our moral commitments as Jews to not accept it and to start this conversation is something that I think is important, and is something that I think is possible and doable in Israel right now. We have to remember, and I can't believe that I haven't mentioned it yet, we have to remember we still have 101 hostages, Israeli hostages in Gaza, that are making it very difficult for Israelis to think about Palestinians. We're talking about dehumanization. It's definitely there. Empathy to the other, and that's with the limitation of free speech that we see during this war by this government, mostly on Arab Palestinian citizens of Israel, but not just on them. But it's hard because when we also get videos and we see what these hostages, when we are fortunate enough to get videos, because most of the times we just have no idea what and where the hostages are from. You know, I'm a part of a community in Berkeley. I'm an observant Jew, and I'm part of the community where Hirsch Goldberg Paulin grew up in. He was brutally murdered on August, together with 5 more hostages. They barely weighed. They were starved. They were kept in dungeons, and it's hard. So what I think we need to do, we need to invoke the values of Judaism to remind us who we are. That's the first level, because the second level, what we're doing here right now, is not something that I think is possible in Israel right now.
Yeah, you're right. You know, we face challenges when it comes with our community and peace building between Israel and Palestine. And as a Palestinian, I say this because for Palestinians, you are not born in support of political settlement with Israel and accepting Israel and a two-state solution. You must go through a transition, okay? And become for a realist and recognize that Israel as a state is here to stay. It's a very powerful state supported by very powerful allies. Yes, we underwent the catastrophe, the Nakba in 1948. And for example, my mother is not from Gaza. She is from the Upper Galil, from the city of Safad. The Israeli call it Sfat, okay? But there are many like her. And for you to come to terms and support a coexistence and a negotiated two-state solution, or maybe a demilitarized Palestinian state next to Israel, you must be educated on that subject. And unfortunately, the PLO in 1993 signed the agreement with Israel, supposedly to end the conflict, but they did not go grassroots and prepare the Palestinian people for the painful concessions that they have to introduce in order to make possible ending the military occupation and the emergence of a Palestinian state. Now, when it comes to the issue of us who work for peace building with Israelis accused by our peers that we are normalizers, I reject the accusations, and I think this is a contradiction in term. It's not normalization. Normalization is when you say, yes, the occupation is lovely, okay, we want to live under military occupation. No, the occupation is heinous. It's the worst for you to be controlled by an armed foreign army. So we are not in the business of normalizing the conflict. We are in the business of ending this conflict. And when I wrote my master's degree thesis, I wrote it on the concept of preventive diplomacy. It's pros and cons, and I studied the Oslo Agreement. And what I wrote in my conclusion, that you need 2 to tango. You need 2 to make peace. You need the Israeli and you need the Palestinians. And as a Palestinian, what more I can have than an Israeli Jew observant that says that the occupation is wrong? And say, furthermore, that the Palestinians deserve to have national self-determination and have a state. No. As Palestinian peace builder, we need to strengthen the peace camp in Israel. We need to have as much conversation like this in Israel, Palestine, and abroad in support of ending this conflict. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. So questions over to you. Raise your hand if you have a question, and then I'll do probably a little distillation of it, just so that we can get the essence captured on the recording. So I'll start there. So the question notes that one of the speakers indicated that some of the protests on campus, in her view, were not necessarily pro-Palestinian. And her question was, what would genuine pro-Palestinian student protest look like?
I think that in order to be honestly interested in the welfare of the people on the land, it has to be constructive. So the protests that I see on most campuses, for example, say we do not engage with Zionists. if you don't engage with Zionists, how do you see possible a solution? How will we reach a solution? Unless, again, you think that you can just dismantle Israel, and that's not going to happen. So it's just, it feels like, it's just, if you want, you need to be constructive. So some of the keys for this is, for example, seeing the humanity in both Palestinians and Israelis, having empathy to the suffering of both Palestinians and Israelis. Understanding that Israel faces, that's on my part, right? Understanding that Israel faces a real dilemma. Something that we've discussed before. You're fighting an asymmetric war with a terrorist organization that doesn't care about its civilians. So on the one hand, you are definitely obligated by the laws of war, and you have a responsibility to not harm civilians, and there are rules for that. But on the other hand, you also have objectives that are legitimate objectives that are supposed to, to bring the hostages back, to remove the threat, the ongoing threat that Hamas poses. And I think that if someone wants to be, and again, I think Ez should answer what he sees as pro-Palestinian, really, but I want to be able. I think I should be able to be pro-Palestinian. If I go outside to the encampments or whatnot, I'm not able to be pro-Palestinian because of my identity, because I identify as a Zionist. And I think that's just not constructive.
Yeah, for the student movement and for the protest on campus from a Palestinian who comes from the occupied territories, I would have loved for the protest to be 100% peaceful, avoid violence, and also avoid alienating people who come in support of Palestinian people. Like, for example, my colleague talked about Jews, okay? You cannot blend all the Jews in one category and call for sanction and BDS against them and etc., okay? Because as my colleague mentions, more than half of the Israelis inside Israel would love to see an end to the occupation and a two-state solution. And also I would love for the slogans of the protest to be realist. For example, instead of saying from the river to the sea, okay, Palestine will be free, okay, I would have loved for slogans like end the military occupation now. For example, calling on the U.S. administration to recognize the Palestinian state and the 1967 borders now, okay? So choose slogans and objectives that are doable and doesn't go in contradiction with the government here in the United States, because I would hate to see students who come in support for Palestine being arrested or being beaten by the police. I would love for the protest to be peaceful. Yes.
Matt?
Thank you both for being here. I have a question for you. So you were working, I think I followed, with the Palestinian Authority in 2007 in Gaza when Hamas took over. And I feel like that must have been a very frightening moment. And I'm wondering from you what that moment was like when Hamas took over Gaza, and maybe to bring it to today, if you can envision a future without Hamas in Gaza after this.
Yeah.
Let me just do the question for the record. Student asks about what the experience was like when Hamas took power in Gaza in 2007, and what are the lessons and implications of having been through that experience for today.
Yeah, so as I said back then, I was recruited by the Palestinian Diplomatic Corps to work at the Foreign Ministry in the peace sector. However, when Hamas won the election, and now we have a Hamas foreign minister, his name Dr. Mahmoud al-Zahar, he's the most radical. So he froze the peace sector and he said there is no peace process. Following that Hamas coup against the Palestinian Authority, I was in Gaza, and it was a brutal military bloody coup by Hamas gunmen against the Palestinian Authority. And I remember vividly in northern Gaza how Hamas gunmen used the mosque loudspeakers and other loudspeakers to say, this is a military closed zone. This is Hamas Ezzeldeen brigades. This is a military zone, closed. For the Palestinian Authority, security personnel, we know who you are, and for you to surrender your guns and them going into the houses of the Palestinian Authority, security personnel, officers, and etc., and arresting them, some being killed. It was a frightening time. And I remember in Beit Lahia, my village, they executed maybe 7 or 8. They put them against the wall and they killed them, the Hamas gunmen. So, and now in Gaza, people curse Hamas because they brought the Israeli brutal response against us. If October 7 did not, I lost 2 cousins on October 7. Suhail Masri and Khair Masri. They are my first cousins. They had permits to work inside Israel, and when Hamas gunmen broke into the Mushab, they were Be'er. Mushab. Yeah, Be'er Mushab. They shot them. They were in a white van, 8 of them. They shot them and they killed Suhair and Khairi. So some Palestinians were working inside Israel on that day. You know, we sent inside Israel approximately between 300 and 500,000 workers every day to go work inside Israel. So for Hamas to launch this operation against Israel while we have 300,000 Palestinians inside Israel, they did not think about their fate. Hamas did not think about the Israeli response against us, okay? And they brought disaster. So people in Gaza, they regret electing Hamas, and they want an end of Hamas rule, and they would love for the Palestinian Authority, supported by Egypt, United Arab Emirates, and the international community, to come into Gaza in cooperation with Israel and to try to rebuild. We don't want Hamas in Gaza. We don't want Hamas in Gaza. Yes.
And that a two-party solution is like, you know, a faraway goal. What do your conversations look like with them when they're on the ground dealing with, you know, bombings and everything and starvation? Like, what do your conversations look like when they're saying, that's two-party, but no, we're thinking about the next minute, the next hour? And my next question is, how have your thoughts changed, like, throughout your lifetime as you were living in Gaza, and as you were, like, moved here? Because I'm wondering, like, I know you joined the Communist Party because they didn't have an arms wing, but was there ever maybe a time when you thought that violence may be the solution?
Those are great questions. Let me try to summarize them if I can. Number one is, well, you're an advocate of the two-state solution, Mr. Masri, but what is it like when you talk to your family members who are on the ground, who are confronting a terrible struggle for survival and being bombarded and struggling for food? And then secondly, you indicated that you had joined the Communist Party because you were opposed to armed resistance. How has your thinking developed and evolved over your lifetime? And was there ever a point where you thought that armed resistance, armed struggle was an appropriate response? I hope I did that justice.
Yeah. So for us Palestinians in the occupied territory, the first time we seen a Palestinian with a gun fighting the Israeli army was during the Israeli invasion of Lebanon in 1982. For us, you know, this was wow, okay? Palestinians, okay, got guns, Yasser Arafat, okay? So I grew up from an early age loving Yasser Arafat, okay, and Fatah. And when it was time for me, I wanted to be Fatah. I wanted to join Fatah. This was my first inclination, is to join Fatah. And Fatah has a military wing. And however, I had a father who was a teacher and who was a socialist. And he had Israeli friends, and he was open for coexistence. And he said, no way, I'm going to let you join Fatah or any Palestinian party that has a military wing. No way. And one time I came from school, high school, and he already had removed the picture of Yasser Arafat, and I had the journal that I write in stuff. He took all that away, and he said, no way, okay, for you to join Fatah or any, if you want to join something, here, there's the People Party, the Communist Party, okay? But so being in the People Party, aka the Communist Party, they are two-staters. They don't have a military wing, and that was their indoctrination. And when I came to America, I got to see Jewish students, Jewish professors, having more conversations with them, and also studying conflict resolution and peace building. This changed my view on Israel-Palestine, and I became a supporter of a two-state solution because my deep convictions, my deep belief that this land historically belongs to two people, the Arabs and the Jews. The Jews did not originate in Brooklyn or in Kiev, okay? The Jews are Semitic people just like the Arabs, and they have their story with the Romans and all we know, 2,000 years of being refugees, okay? So we need to split the land. The Arabs and the Jews need to split the land, and the best way to do it is the negotiation table. And my conversation with my family, it's stressful because every day we lose someone. Every day we lose someone. And now Israel wanted to kill the gunmen, but in the same time, they're killing their families. And this is really painful for us. And our houses being bombed and demolished, neighborhoods being bombed. So when I talk to my family, either in Beit Lahia, where I'm from, they're scared, they're terrified. I have one cousin, his name is Wael, he lost his leg. He was in a school and the Israeli hit, and with a sharp nail, he lost his leg. And he asked me if he can stay in my garden apartment. And I told him, yeah, of course. But then the Israeli came back to the neighborhood and bombed, and they had to run for their lives. And he was arrested, him and his son, for interrogation. And he had to walk like 10 kilometers on 1 foot. So this is just one example. And the others are displaced in Rafah and in the middle of Gaza. And the only thing they want is food, water, medicine. Situation is very tough for them. And I hope this war will finish soon. And they will be allowed to return to their homes, even though they are demolished and bombed. But at least they put a tent on top of their house, on top of their property, and instead of sleeping in the sand dunes for the past 1 year. Yeah, thank you.
Take one last question. You've been patient.
Yes, my name is Martin Sable. I'm a DCI fellow here. I used to be a mergers and acquisitions partner here at UC
The challenges facing the two-state solution in view of, in particular, Israeli settlement activity, the presence of 500,000 settlers in the West Bank, over many, many settlements, the extension of Israeli law to at least Jewish citizens, and the threat of essentially de jure annexation of the West Bank through the extension of Israeli law to the West Bank. So is a two-state solution, the way I would ask the question is there even a viable prospect for a two-state solution in view of the changes in circumstances on the ground compared to where we were in 1967 or even 1973 or 1979, even when Camp David was done, when there were, I think, under 10,000 Israeli settlers in the West Bank?
Or even 1999, which is the last time that Israel really offered a peace agreement when Barak was Prime Minister. I think you're absolutely right. What we're seeing right now with he's the minister of not treasure, how you call it here, finance, of finance, Smotrich, but he also holds a position in the Ministry of Defense, and he's working towards de facto annexation of the West Bank. This is a very dangerous situation, and the reason why it's extra dangerous is because it's silent, as opposed to what we're seeing in Gaza and Lebanon. You don't hear a lot about what's going on in the West Bank. You're absolutely right. Ironically, all of the attacks on Israel only strengthen the right-wing, extreme right-wing government right now. And what we see with the new administration that we'll see here, I'm concerned that we won't have enough restraint put on the Israeli government. Although I could be surprised. I think there could be a surprise there if the president-elect chooses to promote the two-state solution. I actually think that it might happen. I'm not trying to be Pollyannish here, but since I see my future and the future of my children in Israel, I have to be determined to continue on. Even, here I'll go on a... Zionism is built, all of Zionism is built on making the impossible possible. So yes, right now the two-state solution seem slightly impossible, but we've did that before, and I'm keeping on being determined to promote it.
Yeah. So the other alternative to the two-state solution are two: continued military occupation, which us the Palestinian people will resist until the end of the days. Number two is a binational democratic state between the River Jordan and the Mediterranean. And the Zionists inside Israel will never allow it to happen. And 97% of Jews inside Israel are Zionists. Even Meretz, even Labor, okay, which are on the left side, they are Zionists. And they will never allow for a binational democratic state, because basically those Zionists want to live in a Jewish democratic state, somehow looks like Europe or America, okay? They don't want us with them. Fine, okay? Therefore, the only viable and doable solution is the two-state solution. And the two-state solution has reference. Egypt, Anwar Sadat, Camp David, and that depends on UN resolution, UN Security Council resolution 242 and 338, following the war of 1967, and saying it's illegal to hold the occupied territory by force. So when Egypt signed Camp David, they signed based on 242. When Jordan signed peace, they signed 242. And when the PLO engaged Israel in 1993 in Oslo, it was 242. And when America opened the strategic dialogue with the PLO in 1988, the PLO had to accept resolution 242. There's occupied territories, okay? In 1967, Israel occupied. Now, I understand Israel had built facts on the ground, moved 500,000 Jews against the Geneva Convention, and etc., okay? But we are not saying that we want the state to be precisely on the 1967 border. We realized that Israel had moved 500,000 Jews in there and built approximately around 20 settlements or 40 settlements in the West Bank. But what